Good morning and welcome to another edition of Frontier Opening Bell. I'm Temple Ashaji. We've got Joshua Odebisi joining us today from Vetiva Capital Management to give us some analysis. Joshua, good morning and welcome to the program. Bosun Amofaye, our executive editor here at Frontier Africa Reports, is also joining us this morning. Bosun, thank you for coming through this morning again. Gentlemen, we appreciate your presence. Right, let's look at the markets from their status. As of yesterday, the Nigerian exchange was down marginally 0.01%. The BRVM exchange was up 0.50% on Thursday. Egyptian exchange in Cairo was negative 0.39% down. The Nairobi Securities Exchange was positive, jumped by 1.49%, and the Johannesburg Stock Exchange closed southwards 0.53%. We'll look at the East African markets headlines now. US IDFC. Ethiopian conflict threatens $500 million release to Safaricom. ECA issues final license to Safaricom licensed Ethiopia PLC. Sashimi pays 50 pence per dividend to shareholders. FDI, that's foreign direct investment for the year 2020, inflows to East Africa slid by 16%, and specifically Kenya shrunk by 34.7%. Bosin, does that worry you, shrinking 34.7% in terms of FDI to Kenya?
Well, if you allow me, the man who has a better, I think has a better idea of how money flows is Joshua. He's in the banking analyst, so I think I'll let me defer that to him and talk a little bit about the Ethiopian conflict in the Tigray region and how that is threatening transactions by Ethiopia. You know, this Tigray region on one side and the conflict over the Renaissance Dam, that $4.4 billion dam conflict face-off between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia is beginning to cause a whole lot of problem for this country, Ethiopia, 120 million people or so, very huge population. And they're now trying to make some economic progress with that privatization of the telecommunication and liberalization, allowing foreigners to come into the market. So Safaricom and Vodacom and a few others came together. They won the first bid round of $850 million. $500 million of that was to come from the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, which is the private sector lending arm of the U.S. government. Now, it looks like that is threatened because the authorities in Ethiopia has issued a license to call Safaricom Telecoms Ethiopia PLC Ethiopia. Safaricom had moved the former head of Vodacom in DR Congo to go to Ethiopia and head the new organization. And suddenly, the payment of the money looks like is getting a little bit clogged up in Washington because the authorities in U.S. are looking at the Tigray conflict, whether that will continue to explode or that will hurt the business of telecommunications. Will it hurt the interests of the United States and a whole lot of others? So it looks like are there humanitarian issues in Ethiopia? Does the U.S. want to fund a business interest in Ethiopia? And on the backside of that is issues around the human abuse and what have you, very messy Tigray conflict with the main authorities and Addis Ababa. So I think the U.S. is beginning to reconsider that particular development. So I think right now, Vodacom, Safaricom, others will be putting their heads together. If the U.S. IDFC says, no, we're not bringing this $500 million again, would they drop the license? If they drop it, I'm sure MTN will be waiting to pick it up with its own weight. Would they look for this money somewhere? Would they find it? I'm sure right now there's a whole lot of thinking going on around everyone involved in that particular transaction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bosun. Joshua, how are you digesting the FDI reports at Vetiva Capital Management?
What I will say specifically about FDI, not just in East Africa, but in Africa in general, is that we've seen a pretty steep decline across the board, just due to the fact that FDI is very much linked to confidence and investor sentiment, unlike FPIs where, a lot of portfolio investors just come into the market to seek very short-term returns. FDI is far more difficult to attract and usually stays for a lot longer, obviously due to the issues that we've had surrounding COVID in 2020, you would have obviously expected FDIs to reduce quite significantly. So it's not surprising. The issue is actually more long term than that, especially what we've seen in Nigeria. Nigeria has moved away almost entirely from FDI or from attracting FDI in any meaningful form and has gone straight to, long-term debt. So mostly attracting any money that comes into the country right now is very much short-term, very much FPI related. And also you have to remember that FDI, although it is coming from international markets, it can also be coming from indigenous individuals in those international markets who are pouring money back into the country for long-term projects. And these things always have the agenda of development, always have the agenda of creating something new and sustainable. Unfortunately, the whole African continent has taken a bit of a hit just because confidence in the Africa story in general has been hit. The coronavirus, I think the international market was expecting us, as a continent to suffer far more than we have so far. But I mean, obviously, there have still been a lot of economic challenges that have come with the basic shutdown of the entire world for a few months last year. What I'll say is there should be some recovery, definitely, but it will definitely be very one-sided. I think markets like your Kenya and others in East Africa are more likely to get that return of FDI than we on this side, especially in Nigeria, just due to the fact that sentiment towards those markets is far more favorable than it is to us here in Nigeria. That is the unfortunate truth.
All right, then. Thank you very much, Joshua. This now takes us to the West Africa and Nigerian markets now, where the investment pledges top $10.11 billion. That's according to the NIPC, Nigeria Investment Promotion Commission. This data is actually for the first half of the year, up 100% year on year. MTN, BOA, Access Bank, Transcorp, orders to build roads, bridges, etc. FDI to Sub-Saharan Africa slipped by 12% to $30 billion. CEMAC at $9.2 billion. Ghana's inflation came in at 7.8% for the month of June. PMI, Purchasing Managers Index, at 51 reading. You have CDC Group's $50 million trade financing for EcoBank. Let me come back to you again, Joshua, and hear your thoughts about all of these listed companies that the federal government has now seeded road projects, bridge projects to. Which is better for the federal government, for them to generate taxes from these companies or to allow them to go and use their taxes to build these roads?
Definitely, I believe in the situation that we're in, the latter is more favorable, simply due to the fact that if we go the traditional route of, these companies paying even tax, even if you double the tax rates and give more revenue to the government, you are not assured that that tax is going to be properly allocated to the right projects. However, this way, even though it is a little bit of strong arming, if these companies are able to actively invest in or pursue capital projects that obviously they are more likely to see through to the end and see through to the end quickly, because I'm sure that the tax reliefs will hinge on the completion or some milestones within those projects. And, if they can show that they spent X, Y million or billion naira, that will obviously reduce their tax bill. So it is in their best interest to pursue these projects as quickly as possible and as numerous as possible and invest, a significant amount in order to get that tax relief. And it's a win-win on both sides. The public wins and the government wins, because the government doesn't have to do too much with their limited resources, which is what we have been crying out for, begging for years, that this government should come to the realization that they cannot do everything by themselves. They cannot build all the roads, build all the bridges, build all the power stations, build all the dams, and run the country on the limited funds that they have. Not whether it's from taxes, foreign investment, borrowing, especially borrowing. I mean, we've been borrowing at a rate that is pretty much unprecedented, and it doesn't even begin to cover our needs. If you look at all the international community, they've been saying that our, deficit, our capital expenditure deficit is in the billions of dollars, is approaching trillions of dollars, in fact, and it is going to continue to widen as time goes on. Unfortunately, the government is never going to be able to bridge that gap. That gap has to be plugged by private investors, both foreign and local. The best option for them is to concession these buildings, concession these roads, allow them to be tolled so that money can even be made back from it and then transferred to the government. That is a better long-term solution than the government trying to build everything for everybody and then not taxing anybody or not tolling anybody. It doesn't make sense. So I think this is a very good step in the right direction. And I'm hoping that the same way we saw it with Dangote Cement at Apapa, we will see it across the country on a much larger scale with even shorter timelines. Because that's another thing that needs to be brought in is efficiency. And we've not seen enough of that yet. But I'm very optimistic that this will actually push us in the right direction, get the ball rolling. But much more needs to be done.
All right, thank you very much, Joshua. Earlier, you actually analyzed the FDI data in favor of Africa generally. But if you look at what came to sub-Saharan Africa, 12% decline, is there a parallel between this data and what we have from NIPC, which says that investment pledges top $10.11 billion in the first half of this year? Joshua, before we hear the thoughts of Bosin quickly.
Well, what I would say about that is, obviously, these pledges, maybe if you look at the context around it, it would shed a bit more light on what's happening, and especially because this is now in 2021, you have a low base you're coming from, and of course there was basically little or no investment coming into this country really, or into the continent last year. So the fact that it has gone up by this significant amount, I mean, it's still just up to 10 billion. We need, 10 times more than that, 100 times more than that, if we're being honest. But it is a positive. So what I would say is, if you want to contrast them, you look at them contextually. That 10 billion is a good step in the right direction. It is also a lot less than it should be. And the FDI to sub-Saharan Africa coming down to 30 billion is an indictment, if we look historically on how much FDI the African continent has been attracting over the last few years. So if you look at the two of them together, it actually makes sense that there's a bit of a recovery coming along this year, but that last year we saw FDI down quite significantly.
Thank you very much, Joshua. Bosin, now let's hear your thoughts.
Yeah, just a few thoughts to round this off on the side of the list that the government released late yesterday for these companies to build roads, bridges, seaports, and what have you. Temple, if there is anything that this administration seems to be getting right, I think they tend to be getting this right. And I'll tell you the implications of this, and I completely agree with Joshua. The whole idea of government building roads, bridges, and seaports, whatever, government is very slow. The bureaucracy is just too much. Then the cost of finishing these projects is neither here nor there. We're borrowing fast and furious, but you are not seeing the projects fast and furious on the ground. Tempo. Look, it doesn't work out. The time to execution, even to approve projects within the federal executive cabinet, takes a whole lot of time, Tempo. And we don't have the time to waste. Population is increasing. The number of vehicles and others on the road is increasing. So we need to grow businesses. So this private sector, allowing companies, big names that folks can relate with, to build road, bridges, repair some and all of that is good. Now, what it will do is that it will open up business space for industrialization, for raw materials to move. When these roads are built and they are good, you will see that it will also impact on food inflation, because you will have access roads on which farmers can move their produce from the market to semi-finished products and to the final end to consumers. That is another news. Now, on a final note, Temple, Foreign direct investors look at the companies within your environment. If you don't engage them, foreign direct investors will likely fold their hands. Now, if you have names like Dangote, Access Bank, MTN, Boa Group, doing roads and building bridges, foreign investors will be encouraged to come into Nigeria, Temple. And that is the key point here, because they will see that the government is engaging the private sector. The foreigners want to see how the government is engaging the local private sector. Then they too will come as private sectors from overseas. This is one good way. In fact, we should see dozens of this happening across the country. State governments should start looking at this particular model as well, Tempo. Because if you use this approach even at state levels, there are certain companies within the local industries that state governments can also approach, and they can do roads and bridges at the state level, and we can quickly ramp up. Maybe they will build a number of drainages in cities and towns at subnational, state and local government. This is what state government should copy right now, and everybody should do it.
Thank you very much, Bosin. Let's switch gears now to the Southern African markets. South African companies issue impact warnings on unrests. Standard Bank plans to buy Liberty Holdings for 10.6 billion rand. In Angola, all 9 onshore blocks get bids over $1 billion. Delta Corporation first quarter full year 2022 earnings, lager beer sales volume up some 139%. Mauritius welcome fully vaccinated tourists. How vaccinated are you, Joshua, for Mauritius?
Well, I'm not ready to start to venture outside of Nigeria just yet, but hopefully very, very soon. That's all I'll say.
But does that not start? But that doesn't that stand in the way of revenue generation via tourism, which is what Mauritius is known for?
Perhaps, but I guess in this particular case, they're putting safety first, simply, due to the fact that if every single tourist coming into your country is fully vaccinated, obviously the risk of spread is reduced. It's not eliminated completely, but it's definitely reduced, and the burden on your healthcare facilities is significantly reduced. Now, I'm not sure what their own vaccination rate locally is, but I would hope that it's also quite high. I don't think that there are many countries that have yet achieved the 70% vaccination rate required to achieve herd immunity. But I know that a lot of these smaller countries should have, gotten quite far along the line of getting people fully vaccinated. But they still need to remember that the vaccine doesn't, eliminate any risk of infection. It only reduces the severity if you do get infected. It reduces it completely, eliminates the risk of death, eliminates the risk of severe illness. And that is the most important thing. So that even if you come down with it, heaven forbid, you're just feeling under the weather for maybe a day or two. But you can still spread it.
Would you like to make it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And would you like to make a comment or two about the unrest in South Africa at the moment?
Well, all I can say is I'm not really entirely sure. I mean, obviously, we've seen massive unrest across the country. We've seen something similar happen here last year. But I think this is actually on a much larger scale, and I would say it's a bit worse. It's a lot worse than what we saw in Nigeria last year. It's very troubling. It's very unsettling, but I'm very hopeful that from this they can actually sort themselves out a little bit more, because civil unrest usually arises in most African countries due to the economic situation, because if people are unhappy, all they need is one catalyst to, ignite their passions and get them, flooding the streets and flooding the markets and really causing disruption. And there have been too many issues in South Africa that have led to this point, economic issues specifically. And we see that in the unemployment rate. It's also very telling that, all the civil unrest we've seen are in countries with quite high unemployment rates. That should tell you that there's a little bit of a link between unemployment and civil unrest. But I mean, we already knew that. This is just bringing it back to the forefront of our thinking, I think. So definitely, it's something that needs to be seriously addressed. You can't just suppress the uprising. You have to, really address the core issues. Forget even about the political issue. Whatever you're doing to handle corruption, go ahead. You need to just address the fact that people cannot feed themselves. People are not able to work and have gainful employment. Those are the most important things.
Thank you very much, Joshua, for these huge insights you're giving us on these headlines from Africa. Bosun, let's hear your thoughts on these headlines before we finish off with the Egyptian markets.
I think Joshua just put it succinctly. You see, you can fight corruption. Corruption at this level, whether it's Jacob Zuma, whatever, all the big men who are already fat cows, if I could use that phrase. The man on the street is the one facing the 32.8% unemployment in South Africa. It's not among the big boys. It's not among the members of the parliament or those who are cronies of the ANC party and the rest of them, or the ministers. No, they are not. It's among the common man, the black men in the majority in South Africa. So whether you send Jacob Zuma to jail for 6 months or 15 months or whatever, look, folks have lost their jobs before the pandemic. Pandemic made the whole case worse. Mines were shut. Jobs were not there. Cost of living is so bad. Electricity became so poor. Then you find the whole issue around not giving a good life to the future. So look, the whole Black Economic Empowerment Program is not really making so much headways as if it's going to end the problem. So, and having one single political party over this year since 1994, the end of apartheid, making all the promises. This is about the fifth or the sixth president since, the late Nelson Mandela, the iconic leader that led them to political freedom. Joshua said, look, it's going to be there. So whatever you are doing with corruption, whether you are jailing members of former political party or former oil minister or whatever, the man on the street wants his own life and he wants it now. And heaven helps you, Temple, if you have the kind of youth population that we have in this part of the world. That is the big problem here. That has to be resolved very quickly. See, you need to look at this from the two sides of the same coin. You are fighting corruption. Hold on a second. But where is my daily bread, Temple?
Not just the daily bread, Bosun. The beer has also been taken away from boys. So
yes.
That's certainly call for some more.
And South Africans love alcohol. We love alcohol here in Nigeria, but South Africa, Kenyans, East Africa, the way they love their alcohol, Temple, you know Komboti, that song from Chaka Chaka, then it's all about the local brews, the whatever. You take that away from the mouth of folks, even elderly ones. Oh my God. You pull the tiger's tail.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Bosun. Last lap of the show, Northern African markets. The Central Bank of Egypt has said the Eid al-Adha official holiday, July 19th to the 22nd. Egyptian exchange companies, NBFS, face ESG disclosures from 2022. That's next year. Standard Chartered Bank commits $200 million into Afreximbank's vaccine. Among pharmacies shareholders, they approve a 99% stake sale to ADQ. And Morocco's alliances group revenue is up by 10% at half year 2021. It looks like things are ugly for Standard Chartered Bank in Mozambique, but there's a brighter side in the Egyptian side of the bargain for them. Bosun, what do you think? They're donating some $200 million or making $200 million available to Afreximbank in terms of vaccine.
Yeah. Yes, okay. There are two different banks, Temple. Just to quickly clarify, it's Standard Bank that runs into hot water in Mozambique. This is Standard Chartered. So there are two different...
Mozambique.
Yes, this is... This is Standard Chartered giving not-for-profit $200 million to Afrexim. And I want to say a big thank you to Standard Chartered for making that happen, for supporting the Afrexim banks. No one has all the money in the world, by the way. If you give United States $1 trillion, Joe Biden is going to invite you to the White House and have a nice lunch or dinner, or tea, by the way. So, by the fireside. So, that's it. So that's Standard Chartered. It's the Standard Bank guys that ran into problem. The managing director is the one who ran into problem for fraudulent activities in Mozambique. The Mozambique Central Bank is handling that already. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, Bosun. Joshua, any contribution before we head on for the holiday and the weekend?
Well, what I'll say is just to add to what Bosun was saying about Standard Chartered. I mean, the truth is we need all the help that we can get with regards to the vaccine. Now, I'm not entirely sure how far-reaching this donation is going to be, whether it's an Africa, a whole Africa targeted. Of course, the Afrexim Bank is not just for North Africa, but I'm not entirely sure what the distribution is going to be like. Let me put it that way. But we need all the vaccines that we can get. The vaccination rate, especially in Africa, has been quite poor, and I doubt it's going to improve anytime this year, unfortunately. So we need to really gear up for mass vaccinations sometime towards the end of this year or into next year, so that we can start to get back to the true normal, let's say, not just the new normal, because COVID is pretty much here to stay.
It looks like that already. Thank you very much, Joshua Odebisi. Thank you, gentlemen, for your analysis on the show this morning. Joshua Odebisi from Vetiva Capital Management, Bosun Omofaye, right here at Frontier Africa Reports. Thank you very, very much. Temple Ashaja, and this has been our last edition of the show for this week, Frontier Opening Bell. We'll see you next week. Have yourself a wonderful weekend. Bye for now.